Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy that I can welcome you here at our second English version of our regular discussion about media. Today about privacy, right to information and digital existence with Professor Neužil from University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, who has been the first Fulbright scholar at our institute this semester, and Janek Kroupa, a well-known Czech journalist from Czech Radio. Good evening to both of you. You can of course ask the questions when you are watching us via YouTube or via Facebook, because you can email the questions or you can put them directly into the chat. Our email address is czechrozpravy@gmail.com. And at the beginning of the discussion, I would like to ask Mark to kindly present his presentation to our topic. That will, I hope, support the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Elisa. Welcome, everybody. Special welcome to my students who are here. It was a bribe. They're here for extra credit. It was a complete bribe. I'm going to give just a little bit of background, just quick background on the subject of privacy, mostly as it relates to the United States, but including some information about Western Europe as well before we get started. And I've got just a few slides to sort of help us along the way as we go. So the first thing I want to say, and probably the most important point that I'm going to make along these lines, is that the right to privacy is a relatively recent legal conception. That in the United States, privacy is not mentioned in the Constitution, the founding of the country. The right to privacy is not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in any of the amendments to the Constitution. The first real hint of a privacy right in the legal sense doesn't come until the year 1890. 120 some years ago, a long time ago by American standards, but maybe last week by Czech standards. So it's relatively recent development in the United States. So the right to privacy developed throughout the 20th century. And it was originally defined not as a right to privacy, but as the right to be left alone, which is kind of a different idea altogether if you think about it in a serious sort of way. So you can see here that the Warren Brandeis Court was the court that ruled on this particular case. And the quote that sticks with people from that particular court ruling is that the right to be let alone is the most comprehensive of rights and the rights most valued by civilized man. So as this developed through the 20th century, the important thing to remember in terms of the American system is privacy laws differed from state to state. So it's literally 50 different privacy laws. No state has the exact same law. So there's four main categories of privacy law that not only on the other side of the ocean, but these really have validity in Western Europe as well. Intrusion on solitude, which was the original right to privacy, the right to be left alone. Then you can see public disclosure of embarrassing private affairs, false light publicity, which technically might not be untrue, but can lead the average viewer to misleading conclusion. And then the appropriation law, which is using someone's image without their permission, or without being paid to do it. There's several exclusions in privacy law in the US court system. The most important one is that privacy law excludes public officials and those who seek the limelight. And so it's really important to think about that for a minute. So if you get elected to public office in the United States, you lose some privacy rights. If you run for office and lose, you lose some privacy rights. If you're appointed to office and you hold a public office, a government office of some sort, you lose some privacy rights. That's well established. The other category that's less well established is people who seek the spotlight. Who is that? Who seeks the spotlight? And if you seek the spotlight, you end up with the Kardashians. They're not really known for doing anything. They haven't been elected to anything. They haven't been appointed to anything. I suppose they're reality TV stars in the way that you could consider them maybe actors and actresses, if you have a very broad tent in terms of how you think about that. But you have to think about the Kardashians and people like the Kardashians as seeking publicity. And for those that seek that kind of publicity, they give up privacy rights as well. So, in conclusion, in terms of this particular part, the media and the court systems have all recognized that privacy is a public good and has standing within the court system. The part where it gets a little tricky is how far can you go if you're covering public officials, for example. So in the United States for many years, public officials' private lives were off limits. What they did on their own time was considered by the media to be their own business. This starts to change in the 1970s, but the earlier examples are, I think, instructive. So Franklin Roosevelt had polio. He was president of the United States, was elected 4 times, president for 13 years. There are no photographs of Franklin Roosevelt in a wheelchair. There's a photograph of him with a leg brace, which he was unhappy about. But for the most part, how can you be president for 12 years and have really no record of polio? Think about whether that would happen today or not. I think you know the answer to that. We talk about John Kennedy having lots of female friends, not necessarily mentioned in the newspaper. But it starts to change in the 1970s, and it starts to change after the Watergate break-in. Standards of journalism change. Standards of behavior of public officials probably did not change. And when Wilbur Mills got caught with Fannie Fox in a compromising situation and actually was arrested, all of a sudden an arrest is a public document. And a public document is a public record, and all of a sudden that can be in the newspaper. And so when they went for a skinny dip in the tidal pond in Washington, D.C. and got arrested for it, their privacy rights in terms of her being his girlfriend went away. And that seems to start a trend towards even private lives of public officials become fair game. So the question then extends to, if Wilbur Mills is a powerful member of Congress, and he was, if JFK was president, and he was, if Franklin Roosevelt was president, and he was, that's fine, their privacy rights are gone. What about their family? What about spouses? What about children? What about parents? Dependents, other dependents. Do they retain any privacy rights? Does that lesson of privacy rights extend to families, or is it just the elected official? Is it the wife? Is it the ex-wife? So, second issue I want to just bring up in general, and then I'll hand it over, is the idea that after you publish something, there are requests now, both in Europe and elsewhere, South America, North America, to unpublish. And I'll just introduce this idea, and if we want to come back to it, we can. But this is the idea that some people are calling source remorse. So if you've been the subject of a story in the newspaper, it published was online in maybe the year 2000, it's now 2017, you paid your debt to society, you go to the newspaper and say, I'd like to take that story down. I didn't really mean to kill that guy. Can you erase it? Now that's an extreme example. But there are other examples that the courts have paid attention to. And in the case of Google in Europe in 2014, a mechanism was put in place by which sources can ask Google to take down information. Happens in the newspapers in the US all the time. So this is being adjudicated and litigated as we go. The key question here is, are you changing history by taking that element off the web? Are you rewriting history? Or is it free speech? Is it a free speech and right to free information? It should stay there no matter what. So there are legal concerns and ethical concerns. The EC, the European Court, used very specific language when it allowed for newspaper, when it allowed to force Google to take something down. It said the terms must be inaccurate, inadequate, irrelevant, or excessive. They didn't define those words. So it's up to Google, the newspaper, the television station, the radio station, whoever runs the website, along with the courts to decide that. So far, in the 3 years that this has been law, on average, of the requests that are received from in Europe, about 40% are granted. The consistency is pretty remarkably the same from year to year. About 40% are granted, the individual story is taken down or the link is broken, and then about 60% are not granted. So that number has been the same. So I'll leave it at that and talk about, throw out the idea that perhaps the right to privacy is lessened in the era of social media, and is it too late to get it back?
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that we have many questions from your presentation, and it's great. I already copied that part of your presentation into my questions. So I would start with the first one. Does really the right to privacy lose the validity?
I think in the legal sense, the right to privacy obviously still exists. And the courts continue to rule on it, the EC and the courts in the United States, and there'll be more developing law in this area. The question is, though, does the individual, if the individual participates in social media, have you willingly given up almost all of your rights to privacy? Is there really such a thing as a private life if you participate in Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so on? And I think you could argue that there really is not. Because you voluntarily enter into an agreement with Facebook, with Instagram, with any of the social media that you're working with. And as you voluntarily enter into that agreement, you've sacrificed some of your privacy rights in order for that company to collect data on you. And they do, and they sell it. And so you've traded perhaps, well, not perhaps, you traded some of your privacy rights for the right to be able to communicate instantly with your friends.
But on the other hand, as the investigative reporter, as Janek Kroupa is, you need to work sometimes with pretty private materials. Where's the border for you between the private and public? Maybe a kind of right to know for the public?
The key question that we have and we lay on ourselves when we are actually breaking into somebody's privacy, because that is in fact what we do, particularly in the cases where we work undercover. We are not the police. We do not have the same system as the police that does very similar thing to a certain extent, but they have the court's permissions, and the law actually allows them to break into somebody's privacy and then use it at the court. The trouble with the police, and let me make this little turn, is that what happens with the material if they find out that you have not been involved in a crime? What happens with when they tap your cell phone? What happens with your calls? They've been recorded, they've been put in a file, and you technically have a right to be informed after the case is closed that you have been recorded and you have been tapped. But in fact they don't, the police does not actually do that. It happens with the journalists. When the journalists are being recorded and tapped, we do not have the right and we do not have the option to actually ask the police to inform us whether it did happen or not and what was the purpose of the tap. It's a different subject. What we do is, when we work undercover, we of course break into people's privacy. The concept that we actually, and that's probably the concept in the Czech Republic of the privacy law, is that the privacy law stays the same for everybody. What increases is the right of the public to be informed about that personal. So it's not that you deliberately lose when you get voted or when you seek the public attention. For instance, with the actors, in the past few years, many actors have won at the court with the journalists, particularly with the tabloid journalists, that they broke into the privacy on the matter that the actor did not want to have published, such as his wife, property, children, and the children particularly are protected in the Czech Republic when you're not allowed to put the picture of the child without permission of the parents or the authorities. In the investigative journalism, we always look at the border when we have to know that the people that we are going after are involved in some illegal activity or unethical activity. So there is a lot of investigation before we actually go undercover. We have to have pretty strong evidence that there's something going on before we go undercover and we use the hidden cameras or different identities. That is the perspective that we have. Also, it is never upon the decision of one journalist. The editor-in-chief has to approve it and has to know before it actually happens. Sometimes, and that is a trouble that we get into, you find out that even if you had the evidence before, you find out that the story was not true. Then what to do with that? Because you've already broken into somebody's privacy, and so you've actually harmed somebody, and you found out that the assumptions or the evidences that you've had before were either false or not strong enough. And that is a problem that we get into. We try to get into that problem as little as we can, but it does happen.
And how do you solve it then?
Well, it's easier to solve it before if we find that out before the publishing. The trouble is when you find that out after you've published it, which did not happen to me, but it did happen to some of the people that I know. Then there's the apology is the only way what you can actually do. What always happens that even if you work on a subject undercover, you always have to confront the people anyway. So you always have to tell them, we have been watching you, can you explain it? Because we can never know that we have seen everything. Maybe there are some things that we have not seen. Maybe the motives of the person were different. Giving an example, I've been working on a case that looked like the guy that worked in the Secret Service left the Secret Service and started working in a private company, and he got into great conflict of interests because he worked in a company that he followed as a secret agent. Quite a story on to start with. We've published it, and a few years later, the agent himself refused to make any comment, and he didn't speak with me, though he knew that I contacted him. I spoke to him a few years later, and he told me that he actually was undercover in that company, and that it was a false accusation from my side. So,
do you think he was telling you the truth?
I did check that he did tell me the truth that time, and so I've apologized to him and said I wanted to make another story when we would make it straight, and he refused that. He accepted the apology. We're almost friends now. But he told me that the story that we've done helped him, because then nobody really did believe him that he was an agent. So, but it was a story that's an extreme situation. I do feel quite bad about the story anyway, because so I have made the story and I've straightened the story in the commentary and not in a strong reportage, but I've wrote about it so that it would be straightened up at least a little. But it does happen.
So you had mentioned that children are basically off limits.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if somebody, a politician, an actor, a sports figure, a public figure of some sort, inserts their children into a story or brings their children along for whatever reason? Let's say there's a political rally and the children come up on stage.
Yes.
Or let's say there's a social media appearance by one of the children with the public figure. Does that negate the rule about no children, or is it still in place?
No. The children are, with no exceptions, protected by law when they are part of the crime of any kind.
Okay.
Yep.
And if the person is their parent and he brings them to the rally, it's the decision of the parents.
Right.
So then you can actually do it. I'm not sure if you can focus on it. The problem is that there's as you've mentioned, the social media. People tend to post the pictures of their children on the Facebook, for example. And we've done a case about a year ago about a pedophile community. When they have a website and they steal pictures from people's Facebooks, celebrities and normal people as well, whatever they post there, and they call them angels, and they put them as their own dream partners, 3-year-old children. We've made a story about it, but police started to investigate it. But they didn't arrest anybody because it was not legal, but it was no crime in it, because they never attacked the children, and so they, according to the police, they have a right to dream about having intercourse with that child without any limits. When the parents asked that they do not wish to have their own children in that situation, because that situation is potentially very dangerous. Mm-hmm. Because what happens when that person that dreams about the children meets the child, that particular child on the street? That's potentially a very dangerous situation. Though you cannot assume that all the people that are pedophiles are criminals, so that they'll cross the line. But it is potentially a very dangerous situation. So the parents asked them to take the pictures off the website, and they did not do it. So they are still on that website, and nobody stopped it. So the website still does exist, and that is the situation.
Usually also politicians use their children in the rallies, and also I saw the picture you put in the longer version of the presentation, where was the daughter of Donald Trump Jr. And I really like especially populist politicians use the pictures of their children very often. It's also the case of people here in the Czech Republic, so then it is really difficult to distinguish when to publish the picture and when not. It's also the case of tabloids, because they say when someone brings a child or children to some, for example, a fashion week or something like that, then it should be our right to publish the picture because they are simply public.
Yeah, it seems to me that the politicians that complain if their children get attention in the media, but they have essentially thrust those children in front of the media, are being hypocritical. Now, it is the case that in several leading politicians in the United States, for example, President Obama being a good example, they intentionally tried to keep their children, for the most part, out of the spotlight. Occasionally, you'd see them but not a lot. But and I think for the most part, the media in the U.S. sort of respected that and more or less left them alone. But the issue becomes, where is the line? I mean, if at every campaign event the kids come up on stage, if they're in all the literature, if they're on the website, if they're, at some point, they've been inserted into the public domain, I think, and perhaps not even, maybe they haven't even agreed to it. Maybe they're too young to even, really realize it. So I think it's a really interesting question as to where that line is and what really is fair game to write about. I think once you become an adult, even if you're not elected, but an adult child I think is different. Like Donald Trump Jr. That's, I think, a different case. Now his children, which would be the grandchildren of the president, the case that you mentioned was an interesting one because he put his 2 or 3-year-old daughter on a Twitter feed with a political comment underneath it. Well, it's kind of inserting that child into the political debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even though that child has, of course, no idea what's going on. So what do you do?
The trouble with Donald Trump Jr. is that he does act like a child sometimes, apparently. Let me ask you a question. What is the situation with the criminals when somebody is accused, not sentenced?
Right.
And I remember the O.J. Simpson's trial when it was actually totally online. Did that change the perspective of how you treat these people publicly? Because when you publish them and say, well, he is accused, to a certain extent, you already sentenced him.
That's right. That's a good point and a large area to talk about is at what point does somebody who's been accused of criminal activity deserve to be mentioned in the newspaper article, television story, and so on. And so there's two basic ways that it happens in American media at the moment. One is that a person who's accused of the crime but not yet charged with the crime, in other words, the county attorney has maybe arrested you, put you in jail, but there's no charges filed. Not you, but we'll say. I know you lead a clean and upstanding life, but let's just say someone like you. You've been arrested. They've got 48 hours to charge you, let's say, in this particular jurisdiction. So you're in jail for 48 hours. That's public knowledge, but you haven't been charged with the crime yet. So should you be the subject of a story if you've not been charged with the crime yet, but you're in jail? Or does the reporter wait until the charges are filed, so one additional step has been taken before a story is written? So in my view, it's better for the journalist to wait. Even though the pressures are intense to publish, tweet it out, whatever it might be, I'm more comfortable, well, let's say you didn't do it. They held you for 48 hours, they didn't have enough evidence, the grand jury decides no charges filed, you walk. Do you want the story following you around the rest of your life that you had been arrested and held for 48 hours with no charges filed, never convicted of anything? Or should the journalist wait until at least one additional legal step has been taken before a story appears?
The key question that I would have to that is, how do the authorities act? Do they say, well, we have arrested Janek Kroupa and he will now we hold him 48 hours in jail? Do they do that in America? They don't do it here. When they arrest somebody, they are not confirming who are arrested. Okay. We always know it anyway.
Right.
But they're not really.
So there's not a document or
no. Usually, I mean, there is a document, but it's not a public document. It's a document given to them, to their lawyers, but not publicly. They say we've arrested 2 male, 48 years, working in that company. Sometimes they don't even say which company. Usually they don't even say which company.
So are you okay writing about that, or do you wait until charges have been filed?
Well, in my world, as we work as investigative journalists, we know it usually before it does happen, or we should know it before it happens.
Yeah.
So we are actually usually working on stories that end up with somebody being arrested.
Right.
But with the news department, it's a case to case.
Case to case.
There is not a general rule to it. A few days ago, they've been arrested some lawyers for trying to influence the legal system, and the names were published, not by the authorities though.
Okay, and that was before they had been charged with the crime.
The writing, their names were out before they were charged, but they were charged.
But they ended up being charged.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, why do you think that journalists should wait when the authorities do not wait?
Because they could make a mistake.
Who?
The authorities could make a mistake.
But why do the authorities come up with the names?
Right.
Publicly on the press conference.
Well, why do they bother? Well, some media will publish the story before the charges have been filed. All they need is an arrest.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's 50-50. It would be interesting to know what the numbers are. So it depends on where you work. So where I worked, I think on almost every occasion, the managers wanted to wait until charges were filed. But I know competition across town, all they needed was an arrest.
Yes, but
I'm sorry, but I heard maybe there is someone really interested in discussion and would like to pose the question, because I heard someone whispering there. Anyone want to pose the question? Since I saw also the hand raised, I'm sorry, because we were already consumed by the discussion. No one? Okay, I'm sorry.
We've stunned them into silence.
I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that
my
I
question was,
interrupted you.
now, imagining a situation, I've actually seen the situation where the sheriff came up on a press conference and said that we've arrested two people, and now we're waiting to raise charges against them. He named the people. Now, I did not follow the story, but let's imagine a situation that they let them go free. Is it common that the people that were pointed out by the sheriff then sue the sheriff?
Yes.
That does happen?
It can happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do the authorities, though, come up with the names before they are charged? There's no legal protecting...
I think it depends on the nature of the crime, but there's a certain amount of pressure on the police to convince the public that they've solved the crime, or at least are making progress towards solving the crime. And so they like to, announce an arrest. So maybe the public then relaxes a little bit, or the pressure's off them a little bit.
How does that correspond with the concept of the privacy that you have?
Right.
That you have.
So in my view, waiting until the grand jury has brought charges protects the privacy of the arrested person, at least a little bit longer. Now, they still could be innocent and found innocent in the court, but it seems to me that, well, it's a fact that there has to be some evidentiary reason to charge the person with the crime, that there is a little higher bar than just arresting them. Because, you could be arrested walking out the door and you haven't done anything. But if you're going to be charged, there has to be slightly more evidence in place in order for charges to be filed. So I think at the point, I'm comfortable with the story being written at the time charges are filed, and therefore you've lost a little bit of privacy because of that. Because the paperwork is public, it'll go on in the court system as a public document. There's an additional problem here, though, in that in some cases, what we've seen is that, let's say 20 years ago you were arrested and you were charged and you were found guilty. But the judge said, if you keep your nose clean for 20 years, I'm going to erase all evidence of you ever being charged. I'm going to expunge from the record your legal problems. So the legal system won't have any record of you ever being in trouble. The problem becomes, it's still in the newspaper. It's still on the website, but it's been erased from the court system. What do you do at that point?
We have had that situation over here as well. We've actually, and there was a court decision to that situation when the television in the report not accused, but pointed out a man that's been sentenced 20 years ago, but his records were already erased. And they have said he's been arrested, he's been jailed, but his record has been erased. So the story was true story. But he sued the TV anyway, and he won. That they were not allowed to actually say about him. The problem there was that that this person probably would not win if it would be publicly known, if it would be, for example, a politician. But since he was not, it was just somebody who got involved into another situation that the TV informed about, then he actually won the case. Saying the information was not necessary for your right to inform and for your freedom of speech. You did not have to use that information, and that information has been raised, and now you have to look at me as someone that has not been charged of any crime, because that's my position in front of state and in front of the law. But if it would be a person that would be publicly known, for example, member of parliament, the situation would be different.
Yeah, and the exceptions are the tricky ones too. So let's say that the prime minister of the country is arrested but not charged. Of course that's going to be a story before charges.
It may even happen. Yeah. We're not sure that it will happen. But
I don't know why I thought of that example. It just came to me.
Very accidentally.
Yeah, accidentally. Just popped into my head. But you see what I'm driving at, though. So it could be, in America, it'd be the same thing. Let's say you're a governor of Alabama. You're the governor of a state, and you've been arrested, but no charges have been filed. Well, due to the prominent position you hold in the community, nobody's going to wait for charges to be filed if it's a prominent politician. It's really the average person on the street that is the gray area, right? So that's what you're talking about. The fellow that sued the TV station wasn't a prominent individual. It wasn't an elected office. No. He was just a guy. And so he's probably got a better chance to get his record cleared and to defend it than the prime minister does. Would you agree?
Definitely, I would agree. It just, in the Czech concept, it's not because that his rights would be smaller. It's just the rights of the public are bigger to be informed about his privacy. Right. So the concept is the other way around. Now mentioning the prime minister, there will be an interesting situation, because I'm not sure if you're informed about the situation here, but the prime minister here is accused, but he is also a member of parliament and he has an immunity, with him, the police accused his wife and his children. But the prime minister does not want to leave his immunity. So what may very well happen is that the prime minister will not be sued. His wife and his children will be.
So the immunity doesn't extend to the family?
No.
Just the elected member of parliament?
Yes.
Do you think that especially relatives, dependents, as you call them, are much more fragile, or can sometimes be not so fragile in some cases? Do you know about some cases in past, the media cases that you know, for example, from the US, where the spouses or children were, for example, threats to the politicians because of their things or the things they committed?
So one of the interesting things about the U.S. court system is if you're considered to be a juvenile, which is age 17 and under, so 0 to 17, adulthood starts at age 18. So in the case of an underage person, a juvenile person being arrested, it could be that that person is never named in a court proceeding. Let me take that back. They'll be named in the court proceeding, but there's sort of an unspoken agreement among the media that because the person is under age 17 and being tried as a juvenile, that their name should not be mentioned. The question becomes, I mean, there's no like magic, once you hit your 18th birthday, all of a sudden you're newsworthy, right? So many times you'll see cases in the United States where the county attorney will, a 16-year-old commits a murder, is arrested and charged with murder. Now that's somebody who's under the legal age, right? The county attorney can try that person as an adult. And once the county attorney tries that individual as an adult, even though they're only 16, the rules go away. So they can, the unofficial rules go away, and they can be mentioned in the news stories. But if they were a juvenile committing a juvenile crime, typically they would not be mentioned. The problem becomes is if it's a son or a daughter of a politician, if the person's in the public spotlight already, or their parents are, should the rules be the same? Or does the son or the daughter who's 16 and maybe did something stupid, you know, got drunk and, you know, fell out of a window or something, does that count? I mean, or should that be ignored?
In the Czech Republic, if there's a juvenile person being involved in a crime, even as the offender, you cannot name him.
Cannot?
No.
It's
no.
Law?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is a law. You cannot even show his face, okay, because according to the law, and it actually counts particularly very hardly on people under 15, because they usually get very much smaller sentences, and the interest of the state is that they have better chance to get back to normal life without being stigmatized by and it doesn't go over the punishment. Let me give you a different situation, and I'd like to know what actually is the American perspective to that. There's a famous German reporter that was one of the founder of the undercover investigative journalism, Günter Wallraff, who made one of the great stories of his career by getting him employed in a tabloid newspaper. And he made a great story about how the tabloid actually works. There's plenty of people there that do nothing but their job. But they're still part of the system that the journalist wanted to disclose. Is that fair in your eyes? And how do investigative journalists in the United States work undercover? How do they do it?
It's not done as much as you might think, actually. I think a little bit more in television than other areas, although there have been several famous, very high-profile cases that have been undercover cases that have been very controversial, because I think a standard rule of thumb is if you can find out the information without the hidden camera, you should do it that way.
Same here.
Same.
Yeah.
So it has to be an extreme case, correct? So we can think of a couple of the famous cases in the US where the news managers said, this is an extreme case, we're going to do it this way. We're essentially going to lie, commit one lie to expose other lies, in a sense, if you're going undercover and not completely telling the truth. So the two famous cases that I can remember off the top of my head, one in Chicago, in the liquor industry in Chicago. This is going to surprise you, I know. Sometimes some shady goings-on in the liquor industry in Chicago. And so one of the newspapers in Chicago opened a bar and staffed it with journalists and photographers and editors as the bartenders, the cooks, the waitresses. They were all journalists working there. And they were trying to catch the liquor industry illegally, either bribing the bar to serve their alcohol, put it on tap, you know, kickbacks, blah, 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 blah. But the whole thing was a fake. They had bought a building, they had refurbished it, but everybody working there worked for the newspaper. The beauty of it is they called the bar the Mirage, which you can't make that up. But the question is, could they have gotten that information another way? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. The one that got ABC News in trouble was sending people who looked young, like you guys, not like me, but like you guys, people who looked young, to work for a grocery store chain. And the grocery store chain was going to be accused of selling bad produce. And so they went undercover and they had hidden cameras, and they found things like heads of lettuce, for example. The lettuce would be past its expiration date. It would start to turn brown around the edge. Instead of throwing it away, they would take it in the back, unwrap the plastic, take all the brown parts out, wrap it back up again, and put it back on the shelf, which is not allowed. But it was all filmed with hidden cameras. And so the grocery store chain sued ABC, and they didn't sue them about the hidden cameras. They sued the people who worked for the grocery store chain for not filling out their employment application correctly. So they lied on their application that they didn't work for ABC, and then they signed it. So it was a contract dispute, not really a journalistic dispute. But those were two of the...
Who won?
The grocery store chain won in that circumstance because they did falsely claim something on their employment application.
We really have the question in the audience.
Actually, if you would allow me to go back a little bit, I wanted to ask you, in Czech, I believe we have a law that if you're falsely accused and it's already in the newspaper or anything, you are allowed to like force the newspaper or the media to like print or like publicate the correct version of what happened. Like if, for example, I have been accused for stealing, it has been all over the newspaper, I've been free of charge, or how to say it, and like the media doesn't care about it anymore. I can tell them to like put there on the same place with a similar like length that I have been not stealing or something like that. Is it the same in the United States or is it different?
It's up to the individual newspaper or television station. If they've made a mistake, they would be wise to run a correction. And I think, is that what you're saying, that there was a mistake made in the original story?
Yes, or
not
like
that
edition or something like that. Like I believe it's like required by a law actually, that you have a right for it to like clear your name.
There would be no legal recourse for the person who was for whom the mistake was made in the U.S. It would be up to the individual newspaper to decide to do that, and most would, but not all. And they would probably have to decide whether it was worthy of a correction or not. The issue becomes, in the case of a correction, is that enough? So let's say that you were arrested and you were both in the printed version of the newspaper and the online version of the newspaper, so you were twice. You can go back to the online version and make the correction and put it at the bottom or put it at, use strike through or whatever you want to do and make the correction. Or you can break the link and make it go away. But guess what you can't do with the printed version? It's already done. It's been distributed. It's in the library. It's over.
Yes, but as I said, they are supposed to print on the same place, like for example on the front page, that I have not been stealing. So.
Right. So you're assuming then, under that circumstance, that the same people read it the same way every day, all the time.
Exactly, yes.
But we know from data that that's not true, that Friday's newspaper is not read very much, but Sunday's paper is read a lot. Wednesday's paper has a high readership. Saturday's paper, nobody reads it. So is it supposed to be on the same day that it was published? It's an imperfect solution, I think.
Sorry.
I'm not sure that you're totally correct about what you say is because I think that the right for the answer works with the situation where the newspaper makes a mistake. When the newspaper does not make a mistake, when they inform about you being accused of something, because it's a correct information. You have been accused. You've been accused by the authorities. That is why you cannot claim the answer up on the newspaper, but you have to claim it on to who accused you, and that is the state. So I'm not sure that
it's true what you are saying.
The same situation that's different. If the newspaper makes a mistake, yes, you can claim an answer. Yes. That's true.
And the right for I think it's translated as additional information or something like that. Like if there is an open case of me being accused of stealing, and that they are supposed to like print there as well that no, he has been like freed, he's free to go. There is nothing like that.
No.
It's not in law.
No.
Okay.
No.
Then I remember it wrongly. Sorry.
No, but you're right in a situation when the newspaper is making a mistake. If they accuse you of stealing and you're not stealing, for example, if they mix your name or they make a false accusation of you, or not correct, it does not even have to be a false accusation, it can be just incorrect, then you do have a right to answer. But if they inform about the police action, when the police came in and arrested you, and then in 2 years it turned out that you did not do anything in front of the court and you're freed, you cannot go to the newspaper and say, publish it on the front page that I have not been accused.
But the thing about the additional, I just checked it online. The thing about the additional information, it's the truth is on your side, because really, when there is a kind of the process that is really like going on, and it is not finished by the accusation and a kind of punishment, then you have the right to send the information into the media, and they should publish it. Yeah, that's true.
I've never heard of anybody that did that.
Yes, it's additional, I know, but it's the additional information. Yeah, and after the death of the person, there is a right on their relatives.
So that's another interesting twist to this idea, is and the difference between the U.S. and the European system is that in the U.S. system, the right to privacy ends at death. Mm-hmm. So if something happens to the individual, their privacy rights die with them. So they can be written about in any way.
So if you die, they can write your name. It's not here as well. No, if
right,
somebody dies,
yeah,
if somebody dies,
yeah.
and if somebody's killed, then usually you cannot put out their name, or the authorities do not do that. We do it sometimes. Mm-hmm. We publish the name when it's important for the case, but it's not very common.
Yeah, you don't have to publish it, but the courts have said that your privacy rights end when your life ends.
Another question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a question related to a case that recently ran through the newspapers in the Czech Republic and was also covered on TV. There was a guy who owned a shop, and a bike was stolen from her shop, from the shop, and he, because he had a security camera in the shop, he actually posted a photograph of the suspect, of the person who probably did steal the bike. And he was actually fined for violating the privacy of the assumed thief for actually posting his photograph on Facebook. Now, I was wondering, how come it's possible that, for example, we can see similar photographs or similar security camera footages in Czech TV, for example? Isn't there like a double standard in here, or maybe some of you can comment? Thank you.
In these situations, it usually works according to the system when nobody asks for the correction. The correction does not happen. So this particular thief was probably well educated in the law, and he seeked
better lawyers.
He had a better lawyer. But you're right, because the police does the same thing themselves quite often. What this guy was accused of, that he did not actually wait for the police to do the job, and he did the job for himself. So but I remember the case, but I do see your point, and I'm actually with you on that.
Another question. Okay, we have in the title the right to information and digital existence. So how difficult or how easy it is for you to live in this world, especially as former journalist and still active, but not so active journalist, but an investigative reporter. How do you live with your digital existence?
Well, one of the things I've been following since the European Court ruled against Google and against the others in terms of being able to take down information that has been published is there are a number of companies out there marketing software by which you can essentially erase your digital existence. And none of them are perfect yet, but some of them in particular have gotten quite a large amount of funding and have enough financial muscle that they could probably start to actually figure out how to do this. So I don't think we're, unless I miss my guess, I don't think we're too far away from a particular app or a piece of software available to anybody to be able to buy and then insert into whatever social media platform it would go into and erase all mentions of that person. Now, it's not there yet, and the most recent company that I read about has it in beta version and they're testing it, but won't that be interesting if that actually comes to pass? That's a whole different twist on it, right? You can erase your social presence or your digital presence with the software purchase.
And how you personally live with your digital existence? How do you protect yourself, for example?
Well, I have several colleagues who, who are journalists who are extremely careful in their digital existence because they don't want to be accused of bias in any way. And so they typically, when they do participate in social media, it's pretty low level, and it tends to be very bland. It's like, well, I had eggs for breakfast today, and that's it. And who cares? But that's the level of their participation, because if they say, I had eggs for breakfast today, and one of them looked like Donald Trump, and I really love to eat it, that's different, right? And so they tend to be very bland, I guess, and because they're afraid of being targeted or accused, and I can understand that. I don't know if you have the same. The problem is that many of the media managers want the reporters to participate in a big way on social media to drive traffic to their website. And so you could do that, but how do you do that and not sound like you're coming at it with an incredible slant or something?
Yeah, how do you personally treat with it?
I don't. I'm not on the Facebook. I'm not in the social media at all. People in my surroundings, my bosses, and so they asked me on several occasions that I should, but I think I should not. I feel no desire to announce anybody what I've had for breakfast, and even the fact that I have had the breakfast. No, but seriously, what I do it because I do meet with the people that are very dangerous sometimes, and I do protect my family. So nobody knows who are my children, who's my wife. I have went to the extent that I did say that I do have a wife, and I do have children, but that's it. So I think that the investigative journalist should not be active in the social media. First, not to be accused of being biased, but also because it's none of people should not see into my privacy, so that they could not use it against me, my children, my relatives. The only thing that I cannot protect is that my father and my brother are active, and through them it can be judged that I do have a father and I do have a brother. So
do you tell them not to use pictures of you, or
no? But the thing is that there's too many pictures on on the internet of me. I've worked in the TV for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So my face is something that I cannot protect. And the internet and the digital world and digital life gives me trouble on many occasions, particularly when I want to be undercover.
Mm-hmm.
So at this time, I usually do not work undercover in the Czech Republic because it's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I do work undercover behind the borders.
So you'd be a candidate for the software that would erase your digital presence if it was worked?
Until tomorrow when I'll be on TV again. So.
Since today is our discussion shorter because there are many parties, Christmas parties, you have last 3 questions if you want to pose them to our guests.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but you've reached your question limit.
Yeah, this is going to be the last one, but it's going to be directed at you. I wanted to ask, there's a lot of discussion recently going on in the States about the net neutrality, mm-hmm. and it seems like it's going to be pretty much gone in the next couple of days. And I was wondering, what are you expecting the effects on privacy after net neutrality is dead? Thank you.
That's a good question. I think that with the demise, if it happens, of net neutrality and with the raising of this financial stakes to participate in social media, which seems likely too, I think therefore, based on sort of standard economic theory, we could guess that fewer people will participate because the barrier to entry will be higher. So if you have to pay for your Wi-Fi service or you have to pay an additional fee for something you've been getting for free, some people will drop out. And so they might actually retain some privacy, or they might actually get some back if they stop participating in social media because the costs of entry are too high. On the other hand, if the cost of entry, you deem it to be not too high, but it is a cost to you, you're going to want to use it because you paid for it. So all of a sudden, it's not just today's breakfast online, it's breakfast every single day. And because you feel like, well, I'm paying for this service and I want people to know what I'm eating. And I like eggs. So, so I think it's an interesting trade-off, but I think, I don't think it's a done deal yet, but I think it's close to being a done deal.
Yeah. Another question. I was searching for our email. Oh.
Good evening. I have 2 questions, as a matter of fact. The first one is on you, Mr. Neužil. You said earlier that you prefer for the media to wait before publishing some information about attempted some attacker. How can you wait, especially in the USA, where all the media houses are private and they're battling each other
right.
for the quickness of the information? How do you do that?
That is a serious and very important question because the pressure in the industry to be first is enormous. There should be more pressure to be right rather than be first. But unfortunately, sometimes the commercial pressures and otherwise mean being first is financially to your benefit. But that doesn't mean you're right. And I think part of the issue with the distrust that we see in the mainstream media in the United States is that we've done a poor job as media members of explaining how we operate. And if we did a better job of explaining to the public, to our readers, to our viewers, why we make the decisions we make and what factors influence those decisions, I think the trust level would go back up again. But in the meantime, I think the kinds of decisions that the public sees as being rushed or in a hurry or only for financial gain, such as rushing something into publication before it's really ready, might get you short-term gain but long-term pain because you've eroded some trust there, especially if you get it wrong. But I think it's a better strategy to be right than to be first. But the pressures are incredible, and especially on broadcast media. And I feel for my colleagues in broadcast media. Some privately owned stations will publish the name of a suspect as soon as they can get a policeman to tell them the name. But there are still a few that will wait. But of course, every time they wait, the managers go, all the viewers went to the other station because they had the name and we didn't have the name. And then you say, well, our policy is to wait until there's a charge filed because what if he's innocent? We've just slandered an innocent person. And so it's a difficult and ongoing struggle. You said you had a second question.
Yes, it's from Mr. Kroupa. How do you communicate with with their friends and with their family without, fear of being tapped or anything? How do you keep low profile in these times where everything is connected and everything is well known about everyone?
Before I answer you, let me make a short comment to the first question. I have the investigative department in the Czech National Radio, and the people that work with me and for me, we have a different strategy than to be the first. What I tell them and what I force them to do is not to be the first, to be the only to know. It's better. You do not have to compete with anybody if you're the only one to know, and that's the common sentence for the investigative journalism. Know it the only one and be right, and that's it. As a second thing is it's still the best way is to speak to people. The journalism nowadays very often happens online. There are certain applications. There are a few applications that are very difficult to crack, such as Streamer or the Silent Phone or some. But still, there are softwares that will scan your screen every 2 seconds, and then they spit it out. So the best thing is with your sources to either have a key. Let's say that you have a source that you want to meet, and you have to somehow tell him that you want to meet him. Then one of the easiest keys is that he knows that if you tell him a time, then it's -2 hours, -2 days, for example. The spot is the same thing. 1 day is usually not enough, and 1 hour is also not enough usually. And then change the spot after you meet him. Meet on the spot and then go someplace else. These are ways to. But with my friends, I do speak normally, and I always keep saying to myself is that I say over the phone so many stupid things that if somebody has to listen to it, good for him.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much to all for the attendance. I wish you all Merry Christmas and hopefully see you in the next year. Bye-bye.